warm welcome to you all to this session as part of the Out Online Winter Conference. We're giving a big round of applause to our presenters, and I'm going to hand over to them shortly. I'll be moderating the session, so I'll be here and help with any questions you might have. And the recording will be available after the end of the session on the conference website. But for now, Ben and Rachel, over to you.
Thank you for the claps, everybody.
Thank you.
Yep. Can everyone hear us all right? And even see us even? Yep. Hello. Right, so I'm Daniel Scott. This is my colleague Rachel.
Hi there.
And we're digital practice advisors from NTU, which is Language at University. We work in an organisational development department, or team even. Department. So right, just so let me just get my slide in order. There we go. So as this suggests in the title there, we'll just focus on PebblePad, obviously, and the workbooks in terms of the pedagogy, the positives and the pitfalls that we've had through our experience following our successful pilot scheme and now into a service. So I'll just take next. So just a bit of background in terms of our role with this pilot. So in terms of the pilot itself, we've been involved since the startup, and that involved a lot of scoping and general operational meetings and technical aspects in just getting that set up, and yeah, just doing a lot of scoping and liaising with stakeholders and setting up some focus groups and that sort of thing. So which led us on to obviously a rollout in terms of full service, which is a self-service option that we've got there, and we'll detail that a little bit more. We'll give a more detailed explanation in the next few slides or so. So in terms of staff development, myself and Rachel designed and delivered a range of workshops, both, well, just 3 in total, but we've been doing some bespoke ones as well with some schools and individuals, and yeah, we'll mention about those a little bit later on. In terms of a help desk, which is just me and Rachel at the moment.
Yeah, that's us. There's no help this afternoon because we're here.
Yeah, and we've got some actual figures in terms of 2 against, the figure later on. So in terms of the help desk, we've been handling the calls, the emails, facilitating the Yammer group, that sort of thing. Oops. So we should do a bit of a poll now just to find out who's actually using PebblePad. It would be good to know that, so just bear with me while I just sort that out. So it's just a simple yes or no, 2 choices. I think it'll appear as 1 or 2. I'll just start that now. So your questions on the screen. Can everyone see the options? Because I can't.
I do the polling for you.
Please, if you wouldn't mind, I thought I've done it there. No. There we go.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.
No worries. Just click share responses and then I can see.
Thanks, Rachel. Right, so there's a few of them in the audience that are actually considering using PebblePad or hear just a little bit more about it, I assume. Right, yeah, quite a few of them. Right, yeah, thanks for that. Right, excuse the slides, it seems to have converted them in a strange format when we've uploaded them, but I'm sure they'll be available afterwards. So just a bit of background then on the pilot itself. So we chose PebblePad because we've got some early adopters in the sense for some academics that have been using PebblePad previously, so they've come with a lot of experience and advice for when we were doing a pilot. And generally PebblePad offered us a lot of support, useful features and functions that would help us, support us, degree apprenticeships, and generally enhance our assessment types that we have at NTU. And generally it offered some ideal design capabilities in terms of the workbooks and the activities you could design through there. So it fitted that need there.
So you've we've put in our title that we did a DIY approach. So do you want to talk a little bit about that, Dan, as to why we decided to make it a DIY?
As I alluded to a bit earlier, and you can see on the graphic on there, there's 2 of us against 2,100 people, so you could say that's quite unsustainable. emphasis on the ownership part of it. So we feel, for our experience, that to encourage buy-in from academics and professional services as well, we feel like people need ownership on what they like use and produce, basically. So if we gave staff the ownership to independently use like PebblePad, and then obviously to contextualise that, but I'll base that on academics in the sense that they're subject specialists and they would kind of like guide their use, but then we would scaffold their like thinking in terms of ensuring that it's like fit for purpose in terms of the learning teaching that they want to achieve with that, which then leads on to becoming like them being self-sufficient and links to the self-service sort of thing that we offered. Is that quite an answer?
Yeah. So basically, it was out of necessity. So we needed to make that work properly because there's no way we could have done workbooks for everybody, even though we might have liked to. So I'm going to talk a bit about the support that we did provide, because we didn't just leave people to it. We did put a lot of things in place. So we started off with 3 workshops, which are optional, but I have to say the majority of people that are using PebblePad do seem to have come along to at least one of those. So we had a really general introduction. We had one specialising in using Atlas, which is the sort of assessment side of things, if you're not familiar with PebblePad, and that's a whole other area, so we decided to do that separately. And then the one that we wanted to talk about today was we decided that we needed a workshop for designing workbooks to focus on that. As well as those workshops, we've spent a lot of time doing lots of ad hoc sort of surgery appointments, we call them here. So that's our one-to-one session where we're helping an academic colleague do something specific in PebblePad with their workbook. We've had any number of phone calls and Pebble panics coming through, things for us to sort out. A really useful thing we did was to arrange some monthly catch-ups with different stakeholders around the institution. So we have colleagues in the library who support students, the apprenticeship team, because workbooks are being used for that, and IT support as well. So that's been very handy to sort of exchange stories and tips together. We thought we'd like to try a community of practice as well. So we set up a staff-only Yammer group through Office 365. And we've enrolled just over 400 members now. So those are all people that have had some connection with us in terms of PebblePad. And that's proving quite good. So obviously not everybody uses it, but I would say about a third or so of people regularly look on there, and they can now answer each other's questions, which is great for us. And then although PebblePad provides some great resources in terms of guides, we decided just to bring some of those together in a bit of a SharePoint library, just to make that easy for people to find. So our workshop then, the Workbooks workshop, and this is early days, so we did start this about halfway through last academic year, so we are still refining this. What we wanted to do really was take people back to the beginning and really strongly encourage them to think about the pedagogy behind the use of a PebblePad workbook. So if you're not quite clear what a workbook is, because we haven't really talked about that, it's basically a collection of template pages in a book format, so that students who receive this can then fill in the questions and boxes that have been left, and also potentially upload some of the documents to personalise it a little bit. So it's been quite popular with our academic community because it's very structured, and it means that all the students are covering at least the same basics. So in the session, we get them to stop looking at the tool a little bit, but actually just go right back to the beginning and to design even a storyboard. So sometimes they're a bit reluctant, so we don't make them do any drawing, but we do get them to think about just planning out the flow to make sure that they've got a full picture of what the workbook's going to look like. And then we help them with some of the technology, so understanding how to create sort of individual template pages that they can pull from, and some of the ways of setting up a workbook. We found that the content blocks, which have enable you to put different types of content on a page, like the media picker, there's an evidence rosette, but then they're quite key, and if you get the wrong one of those, then often the workbook page won't do what you're expecting it to do. So that's taken a little bit of trial and error. But it's been quite popular and it's very hands-on, so in the session people do get a chance to actually have a go. So they're not going to go away with a fully fledged workbook, but hopefully they've at least made a start. and they've actually thought about why they're intending to do that. Now, we were hoping to encourage some of our academic colleagues to join us this afternoon, but bizarrely they were all busy. They didn't make it. So what we've done instead, we've interviewed 3 different academics from around the institution who've used PebblePad for different reasons, so they're all 3 different. We've made it into kind of a little case study for you just to talk about that. So our first one is from Derek from the business school. I think Derek's got me on speed dial. I think we had lots of queries last year because he was one of the earliest adopters, and he made a workbook that was employability themed for his students. So he was working with a cohort of international students studying for an MSc in HR management, and the workbook fitted in where they had to produce a report and some evidence on an employability theme. So I asked him, well, how did it go? And he said, yeah, on the whole, it went okay. So one of the things that he said was they decided to give students a choice between completing the work that the workbook provided for them or going freestyle and making their own PebblePad portfolio where the student will have creative control of what it looked like. Interestingly, can you guess how many chose the portfolio route, Dan? How many do you think?
I don't know.
Absolutely nobody at all. So all the students opted for the structured workbook. So that was quite interesting in itself. They all went for that. I asked him how did the students find it. So he said generally they found it okay. There was a bit of a learning curve initially while they were trying to understand how they needed to use the workbook and how PebblePad itself was functioning. Those that had the most problem, he said, were the ones who'd left it till the last minute, hoping it was not going to take them very long, and then discovered actually it took them a little bit longer to get to grips with everything than they'd anticipated. So that's certainly a takeaway for them for this next cohort, to encourage students to engage a lot sooner. Staff, they liked particularly the auto-submit feature. So if you're a PebblePad user, you've probably met this. So what that means is as soon as the student opens the workbook to start on it, it submits itself into Atlas in the back. So that means that the tutor can have a sneaky peek and see who's engaged and what they've been doing in their workbooks. So staff particularly like that. Issues they found, we did have a few, and all of these case studies are the same. So we're not saying that these were absolutely perfect examples. That's not the real world. There were definitely several problems. So for Derek, one of the issues they had was time. So it took them a lot longer to put together than they thought. Another problem was about the design of the workbook. So for example, they'd used what's known as a placeholder page, where an instruction was left and the student can replace that placeholder page with a document of their own. What I think they understood until the students actually tried it was that when you do that, all the instructions on the placeholder page vanish and the student's new document just appears in Exchange. And that really wasn't what was needed on there. So this year we've revised that page and used a different type of content picker, which seems to be working much better. And Derek's top tip for you all, he recommends that you look at the PebblePad videos, the help videos, which are available within PebblePad and also online. Watch those, have a go, and then go back and watch the videos again. And he said he found that really helpful in addition to the support that we provided. So that was an employability themed one. The next one we've got is from our colleague Anne Liggett in the School of Social Sciences. And Anne went totally off-piste and decided to make a revision workbook. So that's certainly the first instance I've come across of that. Have you heard of anyone else doing that, Dan? No? So whether you have, you could let us know, so if you know of anyone doing the same. So Anne decided to do this for an exam that her students have to sit, where it's a seen exam, so they get the questions beforehand. But she said she found in the past that they didn't really revise very well, and she wants to try and support them with that. So she created a workbook containing resources, questions and things that she really would encourage them to look at, so that they had a lot of resources all in one place to encourage them to make it easy to go and find that. Obviously, she didn't put any of the questions of the exam in, but it was just to kind of get the students to practice thinking about the sorts of issues that they needed. So I asked Anne how well that went. So she said, yeah, again, on the whole, the students found it pretty straightforward to use, and did seem to see the value of it. She said she had over 100 students engage with this particular workbook, which she thinks is much higher than normal from engagement from different resources. One of the issues that she had was that she had switched on that auto-submit, so it meant that when students used the revision workbook, it submitted itself to Atlas, even though she wasn't going to be doing any feedback or marking in there. And she found that actually students were not necessarily filling in the boxes that she'd left for them on the workbook, but she said once the exams came round and were marked, she could clearly see that students had engaged, and she could also see who'd accessed the book. But she said some students had chosen actually not to work within it. They'd taken the material from it, but actually worked outside there. Now, that didn't really matter because she didn't need to mark it. It was just an interesting point if you are thinking of using auto-submit, just to think about doing that. So we've just had a question pop up from Josh, I think, asking whether what the benefits are of doing a workbook here rather than inside the VLE. I think part of it was that they were using PebblePad for something else, and it was another way of getting students some practice in doing it. It also makes a nice sort of compact collection of resources all in one place with links, so you can quickly click on that. Absolutely, you could have done it inside the VLE, but Anne decided to do this. You can, of course, take a link from the workbook and put that link in the VLE, which would take you straight there to the workbook. So we'll see whether she does that again this year. Successes, again, we're very anecdotal still with all of these case studies at the moment because it's early days for us, but Anne said she definitely had fewer fails on the exam than she has had in previous years, and she knows from looking in Atlas that those who engaged well with the workbook did seem to get better grades than the ones who chose not to, because it was an optional exercise, that one, they didn't have to use it. Now, Anne's top tip is start designing the workbook well before you need it. So I think that's definitely one. She said she's actually put a just-in-time approach is doomed, so don't be tempted to leave it till the last minute.
That's something we'll talk about a little bit later on.
Yeah. So that was an interesting, because that was like an optional use of PebblePad, and clearly some students didn't engage, which leads really well onto my third example, which is from Matt at the School of Animal, Rural and Environmental Science. That's a long title, isn't it? So this is our agricultural campus out in beautiful Southall, if you've ever been there. And Matt and his team have been using PebblePad actually for a little while. They came to it independently before the university took on a license. And he's got several subject-specific workbooks, which he's been using with foundation degree students and also now with his BSc students as well. So they're kind of rolling this in. So the workbook I've put up on the slide, that's an extract from their year one workbook, but he's hoping by I think the end of next year that all 3 years of these courses will have had the opportunity to engage with PebblePad and kind of build on their work year on year. I asked Matt why did he choose to use PebblePad, and he felt that it gave a lot of opportunities for students to improve their reflective practitioner skills. There's lots of things in the workbook that can go in, blogging, reflective templates and all sorts, where you can really get students to think about why they've done, what did they learn from it, what the implications are of that, perhaps less so in the VLE. You also like the fact that when students finish, they'll be able to take this material with them because they get an alumni account and they can continue building on those records that they've started with us here, on those good habits that we've hopefully tried to start with them. I asked Matt how it went. He was very happy with it, and his quote, which I had to put in because I thought it was so good, he said it's like a 3D CV or a CV with icing and a cherry on the top, so it really brings to life the work that the students have done. His students particularly liked Pebble Pocket, so that's the little app that goes with this, because they're really practical subjects. So students were recording themselves doing hedging. I don't know anything about hedging, but I'm sure that lends itself well to a video, and they were able to pop that straight into PebblePad and into their workbook. So that's been a big hit with the students out at Southall. Issues that they'd had, we had a little bit of a problem with Pebble Pocket where the video file size was quite large and it took a long time to upload. Also, they're still getting to grips with particular back office stuff, so in Atlas, so giving feedback using the comments function and so on. But they're getting there. And based on what I've just told you about Anne, Matt actually did say to me that they've discovered they have to use this as an assessed piece of work, because when they've tried it previously as an optional piece, you did find that the students didn't engage as well, whereas now it's become an assessed part of their coursework. They do get very good engagement, and again, anecdotally at least, the students seem to like it and find it quite easy. So Matt's top tip is that you need to get the team on board. So it doesn't work as well if you've just got one academic who's blazing a trail using the PebblePad workbooks. It works much better if the whole team's on board and everybody's coming together with that. And of course you can help each other out as well, can't you, Dan, with the design and so on. And finally, if you've ever looked in here, you'll find that there's a little progress tracker, sort of like a slider, which can show students on the page how far they've progressed through with their workbook. And for his particular students, the foundation students, he said students really valued that, so they got a very visual reminder of how far they'd got and what was still left to do. So those were our 3 case studies. Now I've put everybody's contact details on there, so if any of those are resonating with you and you'd like to find out a little bit more, because we've only given you a little flavour, then do feel free to contact any of our academic colleagues there, and they'll be happy to talk to you. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Dan. So do you want to say a few words about our design recommendations?
Just next slide for me. So after those lovely case studies that Rachel's just gone through, so the message, the image is not appearing there.
I've got an invisible image, sorry.
There's a nice little graphic there, but I'll just explain it. So the message there with the case studies that these academics have created the workbooks, that they've thought about it, they've created something meaningful and purposeful, they've actually used it with students, they've evaluated it, they've made changes. So it's come back to that iterative sort of cycle, the learning design part to it. And yes, they're not perfect, and they won't be perfect, but that's the beauty of an iterative cycle. They've designed it, they've thought about it, got the feedback from the students, they've worked with other members of staff on these as well. So it's all coming together.
Yeah, I think that's really key, Dan, that you're not going to make a fabulous workbook first off and it's not going to work perfectly. So
trial and error.
Yeah, being prepared to kind of accept what's gone wrong, remember it, and then make some changes for the next time. Yeah.
So I'll just go through these pointers. So yeah, my recommendations from the workshop, the workbook workshop that we've created this summer. So we encourage staff to think about the focus in terms of the learning outcomes and the pedagogical requirements. The reasons why they're using a workbook, is workbook the right choice? Because obviously a couple of options for using PebblePad, as the student side with the assets, and then creating resources for for students to complete, that sort of thing. But it could be solving an educational problem of some sort, so it's bridging that gap. But yeah, it's coming back to those needs. We suggest that we draw inspiration, so looking at other workbooks and speaking to other colleagues, not just internally but externally as well.
And some of those on the PebblePad website, aren't there? So in the help section.
Yeah, so which is what I've listed there. So the knowledge base, that's always a good start, and that's one of the things that I show in the workshop. So yeah, on the website there's the knowledge base, and you can actually drill down to a section called PebblePad in Practice. There's lots of case studies on there, but actually examples of workbooks that other people have created. So please check that out. It's really good. But to say that, draw inspiration from a variety of sources. So deciding the number of the template pages within a workbook. because it works quite backwards in the sense that you think about, well, you can create template pages within a workbook, but we encourage staff to think about the pages they want in there first, which we can slot in when we're using other workbooks should we want to. But yeah, think about how many pages should be there, what should be on them, is the introductory page required, a rationale, why are students there, what we've got to do with the workbook. Yeah, just clear instructions, which is what we'll end on in a few moments. Storyboarding, so at this stage it's important, I feel, that to visualise these pages, the content, what will be on there, the interactions that will be expected, and again an option to like verbalise it as well. What are you intending to happen on that page, and what do you want students to do or submit through there? What evidence do you want them to submit, and what do you want to get from assessment purposes? Think about that sort of thing. The nesting pages part, you can add, it'll cause complications a little bit later on. Obviously, you can add stuff, but we suggest not removing stuff, because obviously if students have inputted data on there, that'll get removed, and generally it'll be very confusing for students using the workbook if too many changes are happening. But generally, think about nesting pages early in the design, and by nesting we mean that it's like a drop-down menu, so you've got the headings at the top, and then you click on one of them and it'll drop down into some other options. And just finally, just not to rush with design. I know that's quite challenging given the constraints that academics have got, or ourselves, but if you can have, just try and work in that iterative sort of cycle, develop something, get it out there, get the feedback, and just develop it on the go. It's a good way to do it, to be honest.
So that's mostly what we have to tell you today. We are still learning very much ourselves, are still in this process of finding things out. So our final sort of top tip, I think, and this has popped up numerous times from all different academic areas last year. Make sure, if you are going to use a workbook, that you provide really clear instructions for the end user. So you might need to explain it to them in the lecture, put some information on the VLE potentially, or in the course handbook, but also within the workbook, because of course when you've spent ages designing it, you know exactly what you're expecting them to do, but when you hand it over to someone else, it's perhaps not always quite as clear. And little things like, if you're expecting to write in 3 objectives, make sure you've got 3 lines in your table so they've got space to do that, and be quite specific. So that definitely, I think, would help and make it an easier process for the end user.
So just think about if you were a student going to a workbook, because we are quite a long experience in the sense that they're quite individual. You go to a workbook, you do what you need to do. So if you can make those instructions and that communication really clear, it just helps everyone involved in the process.
So our contact details are on screen, or at least Dan's are. Mine have dropped off the bottom.
Yeah, there you can see them a little bit.
So it's the same email address as Dan, obviously, but with my name in there, @NTU. If you do want to talk to us a bit more about what we've been doing, then we'd be very pleased to hear from you.
Yeah, anything that we've probably not covered, anything like that, or skimmed through, or not said clearly, please ask.
Do we have any questions?
Rachel and Dan, first of all, everybody, I want to say thanks to a fantastic presentation. I hope you've all had much inspiration for using PebblePad more in your own work. But I think we have about 5 minutes for any questions. So in case any of you want to ask any more questions or have any comments for the presentation, we have a few more minutes with you. And thank you both very much. So I think Marcus asked a question. His question is, any experience or comments on using rubrics? Dan, Rachel, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, chance of that one.
Yeah, we have had a little look at this. This is something that we need to look into in a bit more detail. So we have tried out the rubric tool, which works quite well. There is one in there, and you can save it and put it into Atlas to use. What we've found so far is that we can't get sufficient columns on there because our rubrics are quite large. So we were needing to put about 17 different columns to capture all the different permutations, and because the pages are restricted to portrait, it just wouldn't work. So that's something that we're going to come back and look at later this year.
It's very effective from what example that we're
so if you've got a smallish rubric, then yeah, absolutely, and it adds it all up for you, which is great.
Super. That sounds really positive. I can see quite a few people typing, so I'm just going to wait until any more questions are coming through. But we can certainly post your presentation slides onto the website along with the recording as well. So we can make that available, if you like, afterwards if anybody wants to follow up. But if there is no further questions right now, I'd like you to, before we end the session formally, ask you to please put your hands together for a big virtual round of applause for our wonderful presenters, Dan and Rachel.
Thank you.